I'm Julia. If you don't know, if you've never come before, I use she, her pronouns, and I live on Wabanaki land. A quick visual description is that I'm a Palestinian American white woman with short brown hair, pink bangs, and a keffiyeh headband. I'm wearing clear glasses and a cream shirt. My background is the Palestinian flag with our Centering Palestine logo. We've got the packet link in the chat, so go ahead and click on that, especially because Zoom can be a pain sometimes and is weird about what you can click on or copy in the chat. So if you go ahead and open that Google Doc, it is all there for you. This event is organized by COVID Isn't Over community volunteers, including Palestinian, Jewish, and ally contributors. I'm going to briefly go over community agreements and then we'll give the news update. As usual, we have a content warning during the news update and we pause admittance. So if you ever come to this event late and you're stuck in the waiting room for a few minutes, don't worry, we will let you in just as soon as that news segment is over. So briefly, you can see the full agreements on our public Google Doc page, but we're a COVID cautious group organized by COVID cautious folks. At these sessions, what that means is it's not appropriate to discuss organizing in ways that don't take any important accessibility measures like COVID precautions. We are pro-Palestine, of course, and support the liberation of Palestine. We are anti-Zionist. We do not tolerate anti-Semitism or Islamophobia of any kind. We are anti-Zionist, and anti-Zionism is not anti-Semitism. Zionism is a settler colonial nationalist movement, and geopolitical powers like the US and Israeli governments have tried to make Zionism and Jewishness synonymous. This is inaccurate and only serves to further harm Jewish and Palestinian communities. We center marginalized voices, specifically right now Palestinians. We use content warnings when appropriate. And in terms of chat etiquette, we encourage you to ask questions. We just ask that our chat stays focused on the task at hand. With that, let's put our content warning in effect. If you'd like to turn down your volume, we'll let you know in the chat when we're done and you can turn your volume back up. If you have kids around, this is definitely not kid friendly, so I'd recommend putting on headphones. Okay, so we have a lot to cover. I swear every week it feels like we could fit like a year's worth of news into a single week. So I'm gonna try and keep it brief, but you'll notice there's a lot more links in this section of the packet than normal. So please, if there's something you're curious about, go ahead and you've got a chance to read more about it. Starting with our initial update, today is day 193. And since October, at least 34,262 Palestinians have been killed, at least 76,465 injured, and more than 8,000 are missing. The biggest headline from last week was that on Saturday, Iran launched 300 drones and missiles against Israel. Iran stated that this was in retaliation to the raid on their consulate that killed at least a dozen people. Iran says that the matter is now closed, but warned Netanyahu not to overstep again. So this is a big headline, and I just wanted to include some facts, some reactions, some analysis. So in terms of some facts, Iran focused its attack on military bases. It was, according to Al Jazeera, the single largest drone attack carried out by any country, and the first time Iran directly attacked Israel. Israel, US, Jordan, UK, and France, all their militaries worked to shoot down the vast majority of these missiles and drones. Israel says any damage was minor. There are no reports of anyone being killed. However, there was at least one report of a child being wounded by shrapnel. In terms of reactions, Biden has stated that the US support of Israel is unwavering, saying our commitment to Israel's security against threats from Iran and its proxies is ironclad. However, Secretary Blinken said that the US does not seek escalation in a war between Iran and Israel, and Biden is reported to have told Netanyahu that the US won't support a counterattack against Iran. Iran maintains that their attack, and I haven't seen a lot of people talking about this, Iran maintains that their attack was within the UN Charter rules for self-defense. Under the Charter, an attack on an embassy is always treated as an attack on the state themselves. Therefore, Iran says that its actions were legal self-defense under UN rules. Let's Talk Palestine also notes that Israel has been attacking Iran's assets for months, and Iran has so far shown restraint to avoid escalation and to support a ceasefire. However, when Israel attacked the Iranian consulate in Syria, Iran felt it needed to respond or risk looking weak and encouraging Israel to attack further. So while Iran's actions continue to deepen concerns of wider regional conflict, it's really important to remember that it's Israel's action in the last 6 months and continuing today that presents the greatest, by far the greatest, threat to stability in the region. For just a little analysis, Hassan Barari from the University of Qatar says that the Iranian attack was measured and calculated in order to not be seen as weak while not provoking further escalation. However, Barari is concerned that shifting the world's attention to an Iran-Israel conflict would just create a distraction that Israel will use to continue its genocide. Belen Fernandez, a Al Jazeera columnist, shares similar concerns, while she writes that the West's condemnation of the intercepted Iranian attack only demonstrates our own hypocrisy and cynicism when we're 6 months into this genocide. She is also afraid that Iran's latest actions will shift focus from Gazans. However, an analysis from user Fadi Quran has been going around, and it has a slightly more positive outlook, relatively speaking. He writes that Iran's goal may have been to force Israel to reveal their tactical capabilities rather than instill any real damage, especially as the Iranians didn't use any weapons we didn't already know they had. This attack resulted in a lot of information about Israeli defense systems, while Iranians didn't give away anything new, about their ability. This commenter continues that since the US, as well as the majority of Arab countries, don't want to risk regional war, Iran's actions could increase pressure on Israel to create a real ceasefire. We also have to consider the difference in each country's goals. It benefits Israel to create an urgent war, right, and drag in America. However, Iran's restraint has shown that they are willing to play a longer game that slowly weakens Israel's defenses and makes the cost of supporting Israel exorbitant. Owen Jones also adds that Israel has been deliberately trying to start a war with Iran because it can see that global opinion about Palestine is against Israel, and that the Biden administration is under increasing pressure, and Netanyahu faces jail when the war ends. So, right, all of those add up to Israel trying to provoke Iran. So this is a whole lot of geopolitical soup. Thank you for letting me do my little dive. It is possible that the events of last week won't change the situation much for Gazans. However, I do think it's more likely that something will come of this. It's possible that this is the right amount of pressure to help a ceasefire. It's also possible that Netanyahu will simply continue to recklessly destabilize the Middle East. Unfortunately, it's a wait and see kind of thing. One of the best things that we can do right now is making sure that our government and the corporate interests they so often represent know that we as constituents, as buyers, as people who are putting money into the economy, we do not want war. This means we keep protesting, we keep talking to our reps, we keep boycotting it, and making it extremely clear that war is not what anyone here wants right now. Let's go on to some other shorter updates. So while our attention has been divided, the situation in Gaza does remain dire as attacks continue and the population starves. This is topic 3. Just yesterday, 2 mass graves were discovered. Now for topic 4, this is very timely as we spoke about it last week. West Bank Palestinians continue to face violence at the hands of settlers, with a village being attacked most recently this weekend. Topic 5, in terms of international support or news or interest in Palestine, many countries are hoping to come to diplomatic solutions, again, rather than risk war. So Australia, China, Ireland, they've all made statements to some effect on Palestinian statehood. They all have, separate opinions. There's also a lawsuit taking place in Italy that could potentially halt Italian weapons to Israel. The French are threatening sanctions, and the Foreign Press Association, which is like a coalition of a bunch of people, released a statement strongly criticizing Israel for not allowing journalists in Gaza. In terms of US updates, top Biden officials have finally admitted that famine is spreading in Gaza. Them saying this out loud is really important rather than just, gaslighting us that it's not happening. There sadly was a shooting at an Eid celebration last weekend in Philadelphia. And another big item from this week, the Supreme Court's decision to not hear a case has resulted in the right to organize mass protests being effectively eliminated in Louisiana, Mississippi, and Texas. While there is still time for this to be overturned, it does represent a really frightening trend in the US. Some positive action updates to balance out the less good news. Over 50 cities across the US participated in a day of action yesterday. The protesters stopped traffic on the Golden Gate Bridge. I think that was one of the big videos that was going around. McDonald's has also admitted losses following the Palestine boycotts and is instead working to buy Israeli franchises. There was also a large protest in Philadelphia and many other cities over the weekend. I wanted to share. There's this, it's just a little link, but there's this sweet creator, Michelle Santoso from Instagram. She's such a sweet person who does a really fabulous job of demonstrating that you can appreciate and you can share culture without appropriating it, and that you can stand up for Palestine no matter what your field is. So if you want like just a really sweet little dive into a Palestinian dish, I would, and you have Instagram, I would watch that video I've linked. Another clip that some of our volunteers shared with me comes from Professor Ruha Benjamin. She used her honorary degree address at Spelman College to denounce genocide, as well as the repression of student activists on campuses across America. A really lovely act of solidarity. For our last little bit of international news, thank you for bearing with me. I wanted some updates from Sudan. We've got a couple sources here. So more than 14,700 people have been killed in the last year. Over 9 million people have been displaced, and more than 10 million children have been in a war zone. The humanitarian situation is really dire, and the World Food Program warns that this could be the world's largest hunger crisis. The international community has not stepped up as it should to help protect innocent civilians that are suffering because of this conflict. The most recent news is that yesterday at a humanitarian conference, donors pledged 2 million euros to help Sudan, as well as calling for the warring parties to commit a ceasefire. This aid is very much needed, and it has yet to be seen if, this European meetup conference, if that's going to be enough pressure to really bring about a ceasefire. As for the DRC, violence continues and brings with it humanitarian and public health crises. Vavatamp, in an opinion piece, you can read the whole thing, for The Guardian, writes that the West needs to intervene and create an international criminal tribunal. This is something that the Congolese people have been asking for since the early 2000s, and it could be a really helpful move in getting M23 to stop killing and starving people. Last thing, I also recommend that you read that piece linked by the conversation. It goes into how the Rwandan genocide 30 years ago is still impacting what is happening today in the DRC. And it's really good context without being kind of too unreadable. With that, we did it. So much news to get through this week. We can lift that content warning. We are just about to go into the action section. So I'm going to hand the baton to you, Kevin.
Hi, everybody. My name is Kevin. I use he or they pronouns, and I'm calling from Skogeland. A quick visual description is, let's see, I am wearing a white shirt. I have dark brown hair and stubble, glasses, and I am white and Ashkenazi and mixed, most likely, mostly British Isles. We just wanted to take some time because Passover is coming up. It starts on the 22nd. The night of the 22nd, Passover Seders are typically the first or the second night of Passover, and it lasts for 8 days. Passover celebrates leaving Mitzrayim, or a narrow place, whereas many Jewish holidays celebrate themes of survival and resilience. These themes are really brought home during Passover through the Seder, or ritual meal. The Seder recounts the Passover teaching, which, as with other religious traditions, should not be interpreted literally, but can be worked with as allegory. And one of the things that stands out to me the most about Passover is that the Seder specifically sets space aside to grieve for the pain that oppressors experienced. And this really strikes me because this is the Judaism that I want to practice, one that respects and affirms the humanity of everyone. Passover means many things to many people, though, and Passover has been embraced as a metaphor for freedom from oppression by different peoples. We have some resources here. Please feel free to download, bookmark, or save these resources to review and or signal boost later. So the first one is Jewish Voice for Peace, has some Passover resources. They include um, a anti-Zionist Haggadah. There's links to other anti-Zionist Haggadahs. And sorry, the Haggadah is the Passover guide. And they also are going to have a virtual Seder April 25th, which is not the first or second day of Passover. It's later, 7 to 9 p.m. US Eastern Time. And the Haggadah or Passover guide for that Seder is available online. It also integrates Action for Palestine in it as well. So also just a note that does conflict with the volunteer meeting. Apologies, I didn't know the date of the JVP Seder until afterwards, until after the volunteer meeting was scheduled. Another resource, Jewish Voice for Peace, has an explainer on how different forms of Zionism exist, how political Zionism is predominant right now, and what that means. And so I added that link here because it might be helpful for conversations with family at Passover. There's also an event tomorrow that you can find in the JVP resources list on having difficult conversations with family during Passover. And there is also a queer anti-Zionist Passover Seder also happening April 25th. It's longer. It's 6:30 to 10 p.m. There's an in-person Seder for that in New York City. They also have a Zoom option though. And for the in-person Seder, they are requiring a negative COVID test. And then they're also requiring masking in between eating. This is again for the in-person Seder. JVP also lists a few in-person Seders, but I'm not aware of what the COVID precautions are for those. So just a heads up on that. Okay, so we are actually now going to go into breakout rooms. We have a US room and then a room for people in other countries.
Okay, so for our education segment tonight, we wanted to cover a couple different cool topics. We wanted to talk about Keffiyeh pattern in meeting. We wanted to talk about the last Keffiyeh factory in Palestine. I really have been dying to talk a little bit about watermelon symbolism, and we wanted to talk about cultural appropriation kind of within all of this too. You may have seen this going around, you may not. It's a nice little review. I did want to mention that these beautiful images are from the Wilani Coalition. So credit to them for creating this post that I've put on the screen for us. So I'm going to zoom in because you can kind of see the pattern better. So what do the patterns on the Palestinian Keffiyeh mean? I will put a disclaimer. Whenever we're taking Arabic, the Arabic like language and alphabet and putting it into English letters, it's not, it's a transliteration. So you're going to see Keffiyeh spelled several different ways, and that's okay. So I just wanted to put my little disclaimer there. So what do these patterns mean? The fishnet pattern, so that's this pattern that usually takes up most of the scarf, right? The fishnet pattern represents the Palestinians' connection to the sea, also thought to be a symbol of collectivism, knotted individuals stronger together. The resemblance to barbed wire is also a fitting nod to their 75-plus-year occupation. The bold lines here represent trade routes across historic Palestine, which made the region a hub for exchange. Others believe the lines represent the walls that surround the land, obstructing their freedom. Lastly, the olive leaves line the bottom of the keffiyeh. Olive trees are a really important part of culture and agriculture to Palestinians, and once played a really vital role in the Palestinian economy. So I love that beautiful illustration that just explains those little patterns more. I took this little history section from Herbowie. We'll talk about them in just a sec. So we're just going to look at the history that they've put together here. So they write, traditionally worn over the head or shoulders by farmers, the last century has seen a revival of the keffiyeh as it became synonymous with the quest for Palestinian freedom and independence. Adopted by freedom fighters in the 1930s Arab revolt, this traditional Arabic scarf or headdress became the uniform of Palestinian rebels in their resistance against the occupation of the British Empire. Not long after, in continued solidarity with Palestinian heritage and independence from Israeli occupation, the keffiyeh ascended into a powerful symbol of the Palestinian struggle and freedom. Today, the Palestinian keffiyeh is famous for its black and white pattern and is worn across the world by those standing in solidarity with Palestine in the US, Europe, Malaysia, Indonesia, and of course the Middle East. It has become a meaningful fashion item worn by political activists, musicians, artists, and designers around the world. So this is Herbawi that I was hinting at. This is their adorable introduction. I just had to read. I loved what they wrote. They write, tucked away in a quiet neighborhood in Hebron, one of Palestine's largest cities in the West Bank, the steady drumming of machinery spills out from a small, unassuming backroom shop. Here lies the Herbawi Textile Factory. With its busy production lines day and night, its local Palestinian artists are continuously weaving authentic keffiyehs in a variety of colors and local patterns. Keeping the tradition alive, the Herbawi keffiyeh is the only keffiyeh to be authentically made in Palestine. And there's an image of inside their factory. The founder, Yasser Herbawi, I wanted to put, this is, I believe, a picture of him from their website. Over the last century, they write, the keffiyeh has become synonymous with the quest for Palestinian freedom and self-determination. Although Herbawi founder Yasser Herbawi passed away in 2018, his three sons carry on the determination, passion, and commitment their father instilled in them, the business, and Palestinian supporters worldwide. It's a really sweet tribute there on the site. They also mention their present-day struggles. They write that unfortunately, due to increase in overseas low-cost manufacture, most keffiyehs seen today can no longer hold ties to the land it represents. Following the signing of the 1993 Oslo Accords that we talked about last week, and the adoption of a free market policy, the import of low-cost keffiyehs produced overseas began to flood markets worldwide. The growing competitive pressure of mass-produced alternatives began to hurt local Palestinian weavers. And more so, with the Israeli occupation, Israeli checkpoints and roadblocks have created further hindrances to the production and trade of Palestinian small businesses. Production and trade from Palestine small business is dwindling, and the Palestinian economy has been steadily starved. So one thing if you want to support, if you're able to support, definitely check out their website to shop. If you're able to buy keffiyeh, they run like $35 to $45 American dollars, depending on what you're looking at. These are, this is like the traditional black and white one. This is their popular colors of the flag. This, I believe, is the Hebron colors. I wanted to put it on there just because that's the place the shop is. But the way they do it, because it is a small business, is they do them in batches, right? So that's why I wanted to show you the little notify me. What you're probably going to do, again, I totally understand that everybody is broke right now. The economy is horrible. If when you're able to, you can put your email into the notify me for whatever one you like, and they'll tell you. I did also do some research. The way they do it, because of course everything that's going on disrupts, trade and stuff going in and out. They try and do these big batches, and then they ship them to distributors outside of Palestine, so that way the fulfillment can go a little bit smoother, just with everything going on. So that's just a little backstory if you're interested in buying. That's our little keffiyeh section I wanted to do. This is a little bit about the symbolism of the watermelon. You'll see it in our posts, you'll see it all over the internet, but I don't think we've really stopped to talk about it. So I wanted to talk about it tonight. I love this article. It's one of the best I've seen on the topic for like American media. I actually don't know anything about this publication really, but Hyperallergic, that's the name of the publication, wrote this article, How Watermelon Became a Symbol of Palestinian Resistance. I love it. You should definitely read it if you want to hear a cool story. What I've put in here tonight is just the cliff notes. So the cliff notes are that over several decades, the Palestinian watermelon has become a public expression of cultural pride in artworks representing the struggle against Israeli apartheid. After the Six-Day War in 1967, again, we were talking about that last week, the Israeli government literally banned all public displays of the Palestinian flag and its colors. So watermelon, with its red, green, black, and white coloring, became a subtle method for Palestinians to display national pride. Now, there's a little more to this story about how this symbolism became popular. So in the 1980s, there was this major art gallery showing in Ramallah that got shut down, and these three artists arrested, Nabil Anani, Slimane Mansour, and Islam Badr were all like literally arrested for the art they did. And we've talked about Mansour before a little bit. They're quoting an interview with him, and he explains that when the IDF were literally questioning the artists, the officer raised his voice and said, even if you do a watermelon, it will be confiscated. So Mansour said the idea of the watermelon didn't actually come from us. It literally came from the officer who said, don't you dare even do a watermelon. So that's just like, whew, what an origin story for that symbolism. And the other part to that symbolism is not just the color and, that these artists kind of started that trend, but before the Nakba in 1948, Palestine was world famous for growing watermelons. And unfortunately, as the IDF started to occupy Palestinian neighborhoods, settler authorities brought in their own seed companies and flooded the market, basically driving Palestinians out of competition. This is also along the lines of the kind of things they did where they destroyed just a lot of the agriculture and the olive trees and watermelons, the traditional agriculture that Palestinians had done. So it kind of has that double meaning. It has this origin stories in the 1980s with these artists getting arrested. And it was also, a really big export before the Nakba. So that's the really cool story of the watermelon. It's a lovely article. I would read the whole thing if you're like into that. I'm going to switch with Kevin. We are taking turns today. Kevin's going to do this next section.
So a question that comes up a lot that we wanted to address is the question, if I'm not Palestinian or Arab, is wearing a keffiyeh a sign of solidarity and respect, or is it appropriation? So it makes sense to look at what cultural appropriation is. Oxford Languages defines cultural appropriation as the unacknowledged or inappropriate adoption of the customs, practices, idea, etc. of one people or society by members of another, and typically more dominant people or society. And also, apologies, there's no link for this slide as the definition itself shows in search results, but then the actual page is paywalled. So disclaimer on that. A question that comes up a lot is, what is appropriation versus what is cultural exchange? Some people assert that exchange between groups has always occurred, is natural, and is good. People may also assert that certain things belong or should belong to all humanity. While exchange between groups is natural and has occurred throughout human history, the definition of cultural appropriation focuses on inappropriate exchange and acknowledges that power differentials may exist between groups. So I wanted to just give a few examples of this. So you have appropriate and inappropriate exchange. You have something that's being taken by groups with more power, equal power, more societal power, equal societal power, or less societal power. So let's see some examples, which, oftentimes what we think of when we think of cultural appropriation in terms of a group with more power inappropriately taking something is the use of images, symbols, or practices that take aspects of culture out of context, commodify them, and or make a mockery of those taken from. So examples could be racist mascots. There's also a lot of modification of Asian spirituality. For example, you might see a number of yoga commercials that have a white woman doing yoga, trying to play up this idea of health and yada, yada, yada. A way that people with more societal power can appropriately take something or engage with an aspect of another group's culture is honoring requested expression of solidarity. So, for example, request to display watermelons, or participating in cultural celebrations or events when and if invited. So, for example, there was a call that was going around social media in Ramadan for a unity fast, basically calling on people to fast in solidarity with and on behalf of Palestinians. There's lots of different forms of exchange that happen as well then between groups with relatively equal societal power. Some appropriate examples are oftentimes what we think of as more kind of just cultural exchange, An example is actually a lot of fusion food. If you're in Southern California, that's actually the birthplace of Korean tacos. Korean tacos are pretty popular all over the world now. You know, an example of a fusion food, meeting of two different cultures, with relatively equal societal power. If you have equal societal power, a way that you can inappropriately take something is taking from another culture and passing it off like you created what you took, also known as plagiarism. So an example of this would be if I were to market Herbes de Provence somewhere that didn't have it as my innovation and be like, look what a culinary genius I am. Let's see, sometimes groups with less societal power can take things from groups with more societal power in a very appropriate way to point out an issue. So, for example, drag, a lot of drag, not all, but a lot of drag falls in this category, especially like a lot of drag kings critiquing gender stereotypes. The exchange or taking can also be done to honor in absence of coercion. So, for example, it was like it went all over the media. It was like all over the internet. It was viral for a bit. There was a Muslim chef who hosted a free Shabbat after Jewish activists supported him against attacks for expressing solidarity with Palestine. It was kind of one of those, quote unquote, feel good stories that went all around. But the chef's motivation was, to honor the support that he got. And also to buck up against the narrative of non-Arab Jews and non-Jewish Arabs always hate each other. So it was really, it had meaning in several different ways. Let's see, the taking or exchange can also be done to show affinity and or that you're inspired. Example of this would be Cubans honoring Irish hunger strikers. There's a monument in Havana to Irish hunger strikers. And sometimes people with less power can take things in an inappropriate way. Example is disrespecting another people's non-oppressive closed traditions. So an example might be a non-Christian receiving communion. So again, a reminder of what is cultural appropriation. The definition really does focus in on inappropriate adoption and also power. So is one group more dominant than the other? This raises the question of what is inappropriate adoption and whether the adoption of an idea, content, practice, etc. is inappropriate or not depends on context, is not always clear cut, and may exist along a gradient. Whether something is an inappropriate adoption has to be determined by the people from whom the idea, content, practice, etc. came from. Intent and impact may differ, but if your intent is respectful and you get feedback that your impact is harmful, you should reevaluate your actions and seek to understand the dynamics at play. Understanding dynamics at play can be difficult for several reasons. So we all have subjective views of the world, and sometimes these make it hard for us to see other perspectives. And power differentials may mean that some of us don't think twice before asking someone from a group of less societal power to explain things to us, whereas those of us who belong to a group of less societal power may be tired of being asked to explain and the inequitable power dynamic in general. And then also, because no group is monolithic, people from whom an idea, content, practice, etc. comes from may have differing opinions about whether your adoption of it is appropriate or not. Also, I just want to remind folks, these categories are dynamic. Many of us belong to groups that have more societal power and other groups that have less societal power. And it can be hard to know how to best be respectful. So we have a few questions that you can ask yourself that might help with this. So the first big one is, do you care about not causing harm? Um, and what is the power relationship between you and the group you are potentially appropriating from? Those are bolded because I think those are some of the most important questions to ask. Um, are you asking the group you are potentially appropriating from or their allies, which may be more appropriate, if your practice is or may be harmful? Are you engaging in discussions on how to avoid or minimize harm? Is the group you are potentially appropriating from divided on the issue? If so, do you have connections with multiple segments of that group? Could your continued practice or engagement with select segments of the group potentially cause harm to the group as a whole? Are you benefiting from using something from the group and giving back to the group? What exactly are you taking from the group? So, are you taking specific ceremonies, food, or a more general practice that can be done in different ways? Or are you taking an incidental or core concept or belief from the group? And how are you taking it, and what is your relationship to the group? And then another really important one, how do you respond when members of your group behave in ways that are dismissive of groups you may be appropriating from? I see oftentimes a lot when concerns of cultural appropriation are raised, there's pushback from people against that. And I will go ahead and turn it over to Julia now to finish this up.
So this is our last slide, and it's kind of the TLDR. But what I've just put here is, so if you're not Palestinian or Arab, is wearing a keffiyeh a sign of solidarity? Is it respect? Is it appropriation? And so these were just my bullet points that Kevin has really nicely laid out. I really love that chart. I think that's a great thing to refer to. So like Kevin has said, one size fits all answers really don't work for cultural appropriation in terms of answering questions. I say this for myself, but also for my peers, for the folks I know. The trend among Palestinians and Palestine organizers is to encourage non-Arabs to wear and purchase keffiyehs in solidarity and support. As with any solidarity work, it's important to keep in mind that what is considered appropriate will change over time. Like Kevin said, you can always check in with organizers if you're unsure. Like I mentioned earlier, try to purchase keffiyehs from Herbawi if that is accessible to you. They're the last keffiyeh factory in Palestine. Or I've also listed Pali Roots. They are Palestinian American owned and support Palestinian charities. They are in the US. So again, accessibility wise, that might be a little bit easier. My last thing here was just a little red flag in terms of stuff you see floating around online. If someone is making money or getting a claim from like Palestine symbolism and culture, but they're not Palestinian, that's a red flag you want to be looking out for. But in general, yes, please wear keffiyehs. It's a great way to show solidarity and support and to really help signal to Palestinians, that you're like a safe person to approach and talk to. Next week is really exciting. So next Monday is Earth Day, right? So next week, next Tuesday, is part 2 of our presentation covering ecological assaults on Palestine. So like super relevant. Kevin's been working really hard on it. The last thing I want to do before we head out is share this song with you. This is Dana Salah. She's a Palestinian and Jordanian pop singer, and she's awesome. I love her. This is a beautiful video of hers that came out in January, and I've been really wanting to share it with y'all. So that will be our closing song.